appreciate it. Thanks for our last panel. It was very informative, and thank you from me. And then also, I'd like to just a welcome from me to everyone to the Fuel for Thought annual conference. As mentioned, my name is Kostas. What I need is I'm the Fuel for Thought CFO, and I'm looking forward to the remarks and conversation with Mr. Dimitrios Papacosta. Mr. Papacosta received his undergrad degree from Pace University and received his MBA from NYU, and then subsequently conducted his doctoral studies in finance at NYU. Mr. Papakostas has been working at Bloomberg for 12 years, where amongst other responsibilities, he runs the market specialist group across all asset classes for the Americas. He previously has worked for other major financial institutions, primarily at JP Morgan Chase, heading the FX Derivative Structuring Group and FX Sales Group. Mr. Papakostas believes in empowering the next generation. He teaches a Futures and Operations course at the City University Cohen Powell School of Civic and Global Leadership to both undergrad and graduate students. He has co-authored a book, Foreign Exchange Operations and Risk Management, Market Dynamics, Modeling, and Human Behavior, which can be found on Amazon. Mr. Papakostas also gives back to the Hellenic community in many ways. He is on the board of directors and the past president of the Hellenic American Association for Professionals in Finance, HABA, on the board of the International Orthodox Christian Charities, IOCC, on the board of trustees for the Hellenic College and Holy Cross, and on the parish council for St. Nicholas Greek Orthodox Church and National Shrine. Mr. Papakostas has also served as a Fuel for Thought Snap mentor and has been featured guest at our previous events. The New York City Mayor's Office awarded Mr. Papakostas a Special Service Recognition Award for his philanthropic mentoring contributions to our beautiful city and emerging Hellenic young professionals. Today, we honor Mr. Papacosta. Congratulations on your achievements. I look forward to hearing how to create an innovative, sustainable business strategy. And if anyone has any questions during the discussion, you can put them in the chat. Over to you, Dimitri.
Good morning, Kalimera. Christos Anesti. Costa, thank you very much for the introduction. And thank you very much to Fuel for Thought for what they do. Chris, Alexandra, the entire team, you do a wonderful job. You're a great resource for our community. And I personally thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be with everybody today. So the theme of the conference is sustainable business strategies. So implied in the title is a sense that there's a timeless approach to doing business and conducting oneself in business. That if we can just surface it and implement it, all would be good. A sense of stability and comfort. Unfortunately, my talk will do none of those things today. I hope it will unsettle you, cause you to consider and reconsider dogmas you may have espoused about how the world works. And ultimately, I hope it energizes you with the potential of what's ahead. So have you heard the saying it's typically said in a sarcastic way, may you live in interesting times. It's not a Chinese curse, as they say, sometimes said. So let me tell you that you are living in the most interesting, most dynamic times. And I'm talking about relative to the discovery of fire, the discovery of bronze, iron, the Industrial Revolution for sure, Renaissance, because change is happening across a myriad areas of human endeavor simultaneously and at breakneck speeds. Revolutionary change typically happens when there's a convergence of innovation and changes feed on each other and create a virtuous reinforcing loop. For example, the horse and cart were at the heart of human transportation for thousands of years. Yet something happened at the turn of the 20th century, right, that fundamentally transformed thousands of years of the way we used to do things. So you might say, well, it was the discovery of the internal combustion engine. But that's not really true. The internal combustion engine was around for like 50 or 60 years beforehand. It was the convergence of the internal combustion engine, the pneumatic tire, rubber, steel, that made car a possibility at that moment in time. The other thing is, if you lived in the 1900s and you were experienced, you were sort of one of these talking heads, let's say, and they said to you, well, how is this going to impact our future? You would probably say, well, for every single horse we have, we're going to have a car. In other words, we tend to think linearly about change. So one would project, well, You have to build roads, right? You have to teach people how to drive. You have to create an infrastructure to refine this thing called crude oil into gasoline. And it'll take many years to create. How are you going to distribute this gasoline? It's going to take you many, many years. Well, what really happened? In 10 years, there were many, many more cars in New York City than there were horses. Saddle and whip makers were out of business in less than a generation. And the car didn't just replace the horse, right? It changed everything. It changed how we live, where we live, how we conduct war and peace. It changed occupations that were available. It changed the geopolitics. It changed agriculture. The car changed agriculture, how we build and structure our cities. So it changed everything. And there's other examples over the last 100 years where we've seen this type of amazing change. And this time's the same, but slightly different in a very fundamental way. Change is happening so much faster, and it's global. It's not, you cannot project the spread over time. It happens instantaneously. It took 50 years to get electricity to every house in the US. 50 years. In my Chorion, I grew up I was born in a small town in Greece. Electricity came in 1970. But that's not the speed that things are happening today. In 2007, we had an iPhone. In 2008, we had an Android system. In 10 years, 87% of the world's population, everywhere in the world, had an iPhone. And it took personal computers, the internet, huge growth in inexpensive computing. But smartphones didn't just change the way we talk to our Thea in Greece, right? Smartphones changed a lot more about how, from our social interactions to how we communicate. So finally, change is not coming from where you expect it. So for example, AT&T has been around since 1875. Why didn't AT&T come up with a smartphone? Why didn't GM become the electric car superpower, become the Tesla? Why isn't the New York Times creating Twitter? Because disruptive change never happens from the incumbents, right? There's no human way for them to absorb, what's potential, and then abandon everything that their stakeholders expect from them. Once they see that there's no way to hold back the tide, they try hard to catch up. They make the best of it, but they will never lead change, fundamental change like that. So to summarize, disruptive change happens when existing technologies and approaches converge. The resulting impact on human activity and existence is huge and completely unpredictable. As a matter of fact, I can tell you, if somebody says to you, well, I can tell you how the future is going to pan out, given all of these things that are changing, they don't know what they're talking about. Second, disruptive change comes from the outside. You can be sure the established players will do everything to slow it down. And third, the change that's happening today is faster than anyone can predict, actually. There's a period where it appears that things are changing slightly, or we're going to have a few more electric cars, but then there's an exponential acceleration. I mean, for some of you that are familiar with a sine curve in math, right? You have a stable rise, and then it accelerates geometrically and then levels off again. That's how disruptive change happens in humanity. So with that, what appears to be converging today? Disruption is happening pretty much in every fundamental sector. Let's take communication and information sharing in general. The internet is ubiquitous. In Africa, to Malaysia, to Alaska, to Athens, it's ubiquitous. Artificial intelligence, the cloud in itself, smartphones, streaming, publishing. Everybody can publish a book. I even did. But news and dissemination and contribution to news is no longer centralized. I mean, there's good, bads, and aspects of that, but that's a fact. Secondly, take our food production. You may not know it, but right now in New Jersey, there are football field-sized warehouses using vertical farming to make all the letters we need in the New York area. But more than that, you can grow food by using its DNA structure. Where's this going to lead us? What will this particular discovery converge with? The third one is transportation, which I alluded to with the cars, but transportation, it's not just electric vehicles that you can charge at home, right? Think about it. You don't go to a gas station anymore, just go and plug it in at home. It's a big deal. But what happens when autonomous vehicles become a standard way of doing business? The driver will bring your stuff at home. You don't need to buy a car necessarily. You just use your phone to call a car. How will that change our world? The materials around us. We have materials now that are stronger, lighter, more conductive, cheaper, environmentally friendlier. And finally, the big, probably, or the most in our face, I guess, is energy. Today, it is a fact that solar and wind energy is less costly than any other form of energy, onshore, solar and wind, less than $40 per kilowatt. That, there are issues with that, right? There's the intermittency, the meaning that when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, you don't get energy. But that can be solved. That is in the process of being solved with batteries that are utility scale batteries, right? And not only that, we now have about 4-hour utility scale batteries. We're on the verge of having 10 to 12. 2022 was a geometric expansion of the what's called BESS, battery energy storage systems. Essentially, what we're talking about here, we've got to appreciate, is like almost unlimited, if not free, very inexpensive energy around the corner. Is Exxon happy about that? I don't know. Actually, I do know. But so when we are able to overcome all those things, that will be transformative. So this is happening. All of these changes are happening while all our current existence, and your generation in particular, is facing an existential threat: climate change. It's real. It's upon us. We're at least 20 years behind the curve of what we need to do, and the incumbents, if you will, have an incentive to say, let's just burn a little bit more oil, let's just burn a little bit more gas, because they're going to make a little bit more money. The truth is, wealthy nations will be fine for a while. Me and you are not going to be that affected, to be honest with you. But disadvantaged communities in our nations, poor nations, they're going to take the brunt of the changing world. But don't let that, not that it would, but don't let that comfort you, because this is just the short-term conditions. We are global. Even with greater, the refugees will be pouring up north. They'll be going to Athens, they'll be going to Berlin, they'll be going to New York. They're coming. So when we're talking about sustainable business or personal strategies for the future, we must think of them in the context of the world that will be dramatically and unpredictably different than what our parents and grandparents experienced. So I'm going to, a couple of quotes from our ancestor Heraclitus, or pre-Socratic philosopher. So he said, one of the things he said is, "Ta panda rei ke uden men." Nothing endures but change. So unfortunately, human nature is such that we hate change, at least change that we do not design and orchestrate. We constantly look for predictable patterns and simple explanations. So this kind of change creates tensions that manifest themselves in combative politics, hate speech, and people trying to find scapegoats that help them explain what's happening. So in that context, question simple explanations. Armed with a knowledge of a complex and changing world, challenge predictable explanations and challenge specific historical analogies that explain how things will evolve based on some mythical past. Again, as Heraclitus said, "Ποταμό ουκ εστιν εμβήνε δις το αυτό." No one ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and she's not the same person. What I would extol you to do as a sustainable business practice is to condition yourself to expect change, embrace it, get excited by the journey it offers you. And it's important to center your sustainable business strategies around making change your friend. And in that timeless human superweapon, be kind, generous, magnanimous to your fellow humans, and the change will come very easily to you. And with that, I conclude, Costa. Thank you for the opportunity again.
Thank you for the great words. And I do have a few questions for you. First, where do you kind of see the next disruptive change occurring? Like recently, obviously, we've had electric vehicles where 5G has taken off. What do you see on the horizon as the next kind of big disruption?
I just finished saying that anybody that tells you they know where it's going, they're lying. But having said that, look, there's a couple of things though that are upon us, right? The energy transformation is upon us. We haven't quite been able to understand it in this country, but I think as some of the speakers spoke about in Europe in particular, they get it. We need to, right now, we have about 40% of our sources of energy come from oil. Let's call it 30% come from gas, natural gas, 20% come, less than 20% come from coal, and the rest is renewable. That source of energy has to change dramatically, right? It has to become completely renewable or we'll all die. I mean, it's dramatic, but that's it. That's a fact. I don't need a crystal ball to tell me that. And the second thing is the conduits to get it to the uses. You know, right now you put gas in your car, you need to put electricity. Right now, many of us have oil burners in our basement. You've got to have, you know, heat pumps. So I think in terms of, you know, physical, practical change, that's where it's happening. There are many other situations where it's completely difficult, certainly from my background, to predict. Biomedicine and the ability, you know, for us, when we move our food consumption away from, you know, the current way of farming, for example, food production, food consumption, away from what is perceived anyway, I think it's very disruptive. What implications will that have, and how will that combine? For example, you know, by having less, by eating less beef, we know that it'll also help our reduction in greenhouse gases, right? Significantly. That's one of the main contributors. So those are the two areas I would offer, only because, not because I can see the future, only because it's here, it's now, it's happening.
Right. Well, that makes sense. And you kind of inadvertently answered my question a little bit about climate change. So I'm going to go to my other question, which is kind of touches on what you were saying about change, and change being fundamental to growth on a societal level, but also on an individual level. And you gave some examples of kind of how to embrace change, and that's an important attribute to a leader. But other than embracing change, I kind of want to get your perspective on what other qualities you find important in a leader.
There's you know, that's a very big question, but it kind of ties into everything that your previous panelists were saying. The ability, I was going to say empathy, but I'm not sure that's the right. I'm not sure that's a bit too cliche. The ability to connect on a personal level with people, meaning understanding their background, understanding their experiences, is huge. Because we tend to think, well, you know, this is where I grew up. We all grew up in New York. You know, Astoria, you know this. And people are, for example, in my case, right? So if somebody says to me, yeah, I live in Astoria, I immediately have connections. I already have all kinds of, I built a story around who they are and what they're doing. So as a leader, it's very important, especially within business, to not draw entire storylines around people, certainly not by looks, and certainly not by backgrounds. And it's important to kind of connect in that sense. And that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen immediately, and it doesn't happen passively. You need to proactively create, as your speakers beautifully said before, create the conditions and the infrastructure where that becomes part and parcel of what you do.
It's amazing. I appreciate the thoughts there, and I think at this point we can turn it over to our next panel. But again, I'd like to thank you, Dimitri, for your time today, for sharing your thoughts, and congratulations on your achievements and all that you've done.
Thank you, Costa.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Chris, back over to you.